They should have sent word by now. The Viscount will not be coming tomorrow. Someone has already decided what you are worth. 200 people are waiting. The answer is no. 3 hooks. That was all that stood between Lavinia Draycott and the end of a very long evening, and she could not reach a single one of them. She stood alone in the dressing chamber at Renfield Hall, with her back bare to the candlelight, and her arms bent behind her at an angle no woman had ever managed with any dignity. Her maid had gone down for the wine. Her mother had gone to argue with the man who arranged such things. The chapel below had been dressed in white since Tuesday. The bells had been paid for. 200 guests were sleeping under this roof or within 8 miles of it, and somewhere among them there should have been a bridegroom, and there was not. I had not arrived. He had not sent word. He had not in 9 days written anything at all. She told herself the roads out of London were bad in November. She had been telling herself that for 9 days. The hook slipped from her fingers again. Behind her the door opened. She did not turn around. She was tired, and the room was warm, and there was only one person it could reasonably be. "Close it," she said. "The back. I cannot reach." There was no answer. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate, not a maid's. The hands that found the lacing of her gown were bare. No gloves. The fingers were warm and dry, and there was something wrong with the skin of them. A roughness across the knuckles that caught very faintly on the silk as they moved, and the nails were cut short and square in a way that no gentleman's nails were cut. The first hook was found and closed in a single movement. Then the second. Then the third, and the fabric drew together across her back with a precision that felt almost practiced, as though closing a woman's gown in a house that was not his own were simply a task, and a task ought to be finished properly. Then the hands withdrew. "Your maid should not have left you alone," said a voice from the doorway. It was low and unhurried, and it did not rise at the end, and Lavinia understood from 4 words that she was listening to a man who had been obeyed for so long that his sentences had lost the habit of asking. She turned around. I was tall and dark in a plain coat with no order across it and no ribbon. Nothing at all to say who he was, as though he had dressed for a wedding by choosing whatever would be least visible in a corridor. His nose had been broken once and set badly, and the set of it took his face out of the ordinary run of well-made faces. His eyes were very dark, and when they came to rest on her, they simply stayed without the small, polite slide away that men used when they wished to be thought subtle. She knew him. They had never been introduced. She knew him the way one knew weather. Ambrose Hesketh, Duke of Kelverton. Slate and lime out of Westmoreland, 3 quarries and 11 kilns, and a coasting trade down the eastern ports in his own bottoms. He was at Renfield because the Marquis of Sedgewater had spent 2 years trying to route that lime through a Sedgewater wharf. "I was not supposed to be within 40 yards of this door." "You are not my maid," she said. "No, this is my dressing room." The door stood open. I asked someone to close my gown. I assumed it would be someone I had asked. "I can leave," he said, and did not move. She turned to the glass because the glass was easier, and smoothed the silk at her waist, with hands she was pleased to find steady. "You are the Duke of Kelverton, and you are Lavinia Draycott," he said, "who is to be married tomorrow to a man who has not yet arrived." There was nothing cruel in the way he said it. He offered it as one offers a figure from a ledger, and that was very much worse. "He will come," she said. I did not say he would not. She met his eyes in the glass. He was still looking directly at her. He had not once pretended otherwise. "What are you doing in this wing of the house?" she said. "I took a wrong turning. The east corridor is not well marked." It was a lie, and they both knew it was a lie, and she was too tired and too braced for the morning to make him carry it any further. "The rehearsal is in the west wing," she said. "You have taken a considerable wrong turning." Something happened at the corner of his mouth, and then did not finish happening. "So I have," he said. He bowed. It was a perfectly correct bow, exact to the degree, and there was something in the precision of it that made her think of the hooks. Then he was gone, and the door was shut, and Lavinia stood in front of the glass, with her heart doing something she had no word for. Later in the dark, with the gown hanging pale against the wall, like something drowned, she thought about a stranger's hands on the back of her dress, and about how certain they had been, and she told herself it meant nothing at all. She was very nearly convincing. The morning came in white. Snow had fallen in the night early for the season, and thin and Renfield Hall stood against it the way a house stands in an engraving, all edge and no depth. Everything was ready. There was no bridegroom. Lavinia sat in the bride's chamber dressed and veiled, while her mother walked a tight circle from the window to the fire and back. Lady Draycott had been raised at court, and did not permit herself to show alarm in any of the usual ways. She showed it by adjusting the cuffs of her own sleeves. She had adjusted them 9 times in 20 minutes, and Lavinia had counted every one, because counting was better than the alternative. "I is delayed," her mother said. "The roads." "I was due on Monday," Lavinia said. "He missed the dinner. He has sent nothing in 9 days. His father's secretary told Mr. Bewley that the Viscount's arrangements had grown complicated. That was the whole of it. Complicated." Her mother looked at the window and said nothing. There was a knock. Mrs. Yaxley came in with her book under her arm, and her face composed into the particular blankness of a servant behaving as though the morning were proceeding normally. "Begging your pardon, my lady. For the breakfast. Am I to lay for 200 or hold back?" "You will lay for 200, Lady Draycott said. "Very good." Mrs. Yaxley made a mark in her book, and then, because she had been 22 years at Renfield and had earned a small vanity, she added, "I have kept this book since '93, and I have never yet been out by one cover. There is no sense in guessing at a number when you can write it down." The door closed. 11 minutes later it opened again, and Mr. Bewley stood in it with a letter and the expression of a man who has been given something to carry and would rather have been shot. "Read it," Lavinia said. "The Viscount Bramhall presented his sincere regrets. The Viscount Bramhall found himself unable to attend. The Viscount Bramhall proposed that the marriage be postponed, and that any further discussion proceed through the family solicitors at such time as was convenient to both houses." The room went entirely quiet. Her mother made a small sound and put one hand on the sill. Lavinia did not move. She sat in her wedding gown with her veil arranged and her hands folded, and she looked at a place on the wall about a foot above Mr. Bewley's shoulder. "Through the solicitors," she said. "Yes, my lady. I is ending a betrothal that was in the Gazette. In March," she said, "in front of 200 people in my father's house, through the solicitors." Mr. Bewley had the good sense to say nothing whatever. Lavinia stood up. The silk moved around her all those months of it, all that intention. She looked at herself once in the glass. Veil. Roses. The face of a woman who had known something for a while and had worked very hard at not listening to it. "Mr. Bewley," she said, "go down and open the chapel." Her mother broke then. "Lavinia, no. Not publicly. We can wait an hour. We can say he is ill." "We will not lie to 200 people who have come out in the snow," Lavinia said, "and they will not sit down there inventing it for themselves while I stand behind a door." She smoothed the front of the gown. "Open the chapel," she said. "I will go down alone." The chapel was full. 200 people in their best in the pews in the candlelight, looking at an altar with nobody standing at it. The whispering had already begun by the time the doors opened, and it stopped in one movement the way a field of birds stops when they saw her come through them by herself. She had decided on the walk down from the bride's chamber that she would not weep in front of anyone, because the grief was hers, and she was not going to hand it out to a room that would carry it into every drawing room between here and London by Thursday. She stopped in front of the altar and turned and faced them. "The Viscount Bramhall will not be coming today," she said. Her voice held. "The engagement is at an end. I am sorry for the inconvenience to those of you who have traveled far, and for the cold. The hall will be open, and there is a breakfast laid for 200, and I would take it as a kindness if you ate it. I would take it as a greater kindness if you were gentle with my mother this morning." She paused, and then she said more quietly, "I would like a moment by myself." The room began to move. 200 heads turned, and in the turning she saw him. He had not sat with the others. He was standing at the back wall by the door, with his hands behind him apart from everybody, and he was not looking at the altar or at the crowd. He was looking at her. She looked away first. She went out through the small door at the side of the chancel into the stone passage that ran along the north wall, and there alone with the snow going past the high window in that soft, indifferent way it has, Lavinia Draycott finally let herself feel it. Not the humiliation. She had put that somewhere to be examined later. The other thing, the ache of having half known and having chosen out of duty and out of hope and out of the plain, wished not to be difficult to believe, she was mistaken. She put her hand flat against the cold stone and breathed until it was over. The breakfast was served as she had promised, and had the particular quality of a gathering at which everybody wishes to leave and nobody wishes to be first. Lavinia accepted condolence without inviting pity, and thanked people for coming, and did not once go upstairs, though she wanted to go upstairs more than she had ever wanted anything. It was after 2 when Mr. Crispin Vane found her by the long windows. Vane was a second son, with an allowance and a great deal of time. He had danced with her twice at Almack's in the spring, and had evidently been building on it ever since. "Lady Lavinia," he said, and took her hand and pressed it. "I am appalled for you. What a shabby business." "You are kind," she said, and took the hand back. "More than kind," he said, and lowered his voice, and came half a step nearer than the room allowed. "A woman of your quality is owed better than a man who cannot trouble himself to appear. If you were ever in want of something steadier, I should count it the honor of my life to—" "Mr. Vane!" The voice came from somewhere to her left. It was not loud. It had never in its life needed to be loud. Kelverden was standing 2 yards away with a glass held loose at his side, and he was not looking at Vane with any anger at all. He was looking at him the way something very large and very calm looks at something about to do itself an injury. "She has had a difficult morning," Kelverden said. "I imagine she would prefer space to proposals." Vane recalculated at speed in the manner of a man who understood ranks, the way other men understood their own hands, and bowed and removed himself. "I did not require rescuing," she said. "I did not rescue you," Kelverden said. "I said the thing you were already thinking." She turned to look at him properly. He did not look away. "Do you do that often?" "Tell people what I am thinking." "No. This is the second time we have spoken. And yet you seem very certain." "You took your hand back before I said a word," he said. "That is observation, not presumption." She had prepared a distance for the Duke of Kelverden. He was a political guest, her father's business, and not hers, and she had intended to treat him as furniture. He kept declining to be furniture. "Thank you," she said, "however unnecessary." "You are welcome," he said, "however unnecessary." By 9, the last carriage had gone, and the house had dropped into that exhausted quiet which follows an occasion nobody enjoyed. Lavinia sat in the small library at the end of the east wing, with the fire lit and a decanter beside her that she did not usually touch and had now touched twice. She was not thinking about the humiliation. She was thinking about what Mrs. Yaxley had said in the passage on the way in, quietly, in the voice servants use when they are giving you something that will cost them their place if it goes further. That the Viscount's man had lain at the King's Head in the village on Sunday and had gone back to London on Monday morning and had never come up to the house at all. Sunday. He had known on Sunday and had sent a man as far as the village and turned him round. "You should not be by yourself tonight." She did not start. She had been, she realized, somewhere underneath, half expecting him. "This is the library," she said without turning. "Are you lost again?" "No," said Kelverden. He came and stood by the other chair and did not sit, and looked at the fire. "You have heard," she said. "Most of the older guests have. These things do not stay quiet." He said nothing further, and she was grateful for it. She had been handed reassurance all day in cupfuls until she was sick with it. "How long did you know," she said, "that he was not coming?" "How long before I went down?" I gave it to her straight, because he had evidently decided some time ago that she could carry it. The writer came in at 7:30. She had walked into the chapel at 11, so he had known for 3.5 hours. He had stood at the back wall and watched her walk the length of that aisle and turn around and speak to 200 people, and he had said nothing. She examined herself for anger and could not immediately find any which interested her. "Why did you not tell me?" she said. "Because it was not mine to tell," he said, "and because you did it better without a warning." She waited. "If I had stopped you in that passage at 7:30, he said, you would have had 3 hours upstairs to manage your face in private, and by 11 you would have gone down as a woman being carried through a catastrophe. Instead, you went down and spoke plainly, and it was not a catastrophe. It was a decision. The room knew the difference, and you will need the room to know it for the next 2 years. He looked at the fire. "I did not want to take that from you by turning it into a crisis," he said. She could not decide whether to be grateful or furious. The line between them turned out to be very thin. "You are an extremely strange man," she said at last. "I have been told so." The firelight was doing something forgiving to the bad set of his nose. He was watching her with that same unhurried directness she had noticed 3 times now, and it was not appetite, and it was not appraisal. It was closer to the look of a man considering something he had been considering for longer than he could account for, and had not yet decided what to do about. "Go to bed, Your Grace," she said. "I should like to be by myself." High inclined his head. "Good night, Lady Lavinia." High went. She sat until the fire was low. Then she took a candle down the passage to her father's business room because she wanted the clause on determination and did not intend to ask anybody's permission to read it. She wanted to know precisely how a thing like this was permitted to end and by whose hand, because she had signed nothing and been consulted about nothing, and was tired of learning the shape of her own life from other people's letters. The articles were in the second drawer tied in tape. She found the determination clause. It was ordinary. Underneath it, folded separately in its own tape, was a supplemental article she had never seen in her life. It was dated the 26th of March, 1815. It provided that the agreement between the houses of Sedgewater and Draycott should stand for, so long as the average price of wheat returned at the market at Bury St. Edmunds was maintained above 80 shillings the quarter, and that below that figure either house might withdraw upon notice without penalty and without cause assigned. Beside it in the drawer, because her father was not a tidy man, lay the market return for October. 52 shillings and 6pence. Lavinia stood in the cold room with the candle going and read the figure 3 times. She had not been jilted. She had been sold off a falling market, and her father had signed the clause that permitted it in March 8 months ago, and had then come down to breakfast every morning since and asked her how the flowers were coming on. She folded the supplemental article along its original crease very precisely, because the way you handle a piece of paper says something about how you intend to handle what is written on it. She put it in the pocket of her dress. She told no one. A note came up with the breakfast things next morning. No crest, no direction beyond her name, in a hand that was spare and upright, and did not waste ink. "I am kept here 3 days more, on Lord Sedgewater's business, which is now unlikely to prosper. If you have need of anything, or simply want the company of somebody who will not offer you sympathy, the east sitting room is generally empty after 10. A.H." Lavinia read it twice, then folded it and put it in the pocket of her dress, where it lay against the supplemental article. At 10:30, she went to the east sitting room. The tea things were set for 2, which meant either that the household had guessed or that somebody had asked, and she was fairly sure which. Neither of them said good morning. It seemed too small a thing to say. "You came," he said. "You left a note." "I leave a good many notes. People do not always come. I nearly did not." What decided it? She considered a graceful answer and found she had no appetite for one. "Everybody in this house speaks to me as though I were a cracked cup," she said. "You are the only person who has not. I find I would rather be spoken to." He reached forward and poured. She watched his hands and noticed that she was giving his hands an unreasonable share of her attention, and decided to think about that later. "Tell me about the lime," she said. "You want to hear about lime? I want to hear about something that is not my ruined wedding, from somebody who will not soften every sentence before he passes it over. So, yes. What does Westmoreland want with Suffolk?" Something moved in his face that looked oddly like relief, as though he too had spent a day trapped in the amber of careful condolence. So he told her. Not the polished summary a man gives a woman he expects to be politely uninterested. He told her the way a man talks who has spent 15 years in rooms where the details mattered. 3 quarries above Kelverton Fell and 11 kilns burning at the foot of it. Slate for roofs, lime for mortar, and for the fields, because sour land takes lime, the way a sick man takes broth. "And the Corn Law," she said. "You voted against it." "I spoke against it and voted against it and lost by a very great margin." "Why?" "Because I employ 460 men and their families, and none of them grow wheat, and all of them eat bread." He set down his cup. The gentleman who made that law borrowed against wheat at war prices and then legislated to keep war prices after the war. It is arithmetic done by men who only ever count on one side of the page. Lavinia asked questions, and they were not the questions a woman asks to be agreeable. They were the questions of somebody who had been following. He answered them, and she noticed the line between his brows loosening as the hour went on, in the way a man's face loosens when he stops expecting to be misunderstood. On the third morning, he told her about his mother. She had not asked. He simply began looking out at the garden, and she understood that this was not a thing he said often. His mother had died when he was 19. She had been the only person at Kelverton who laughed at regular intervals. After her, the house became what it had always looked like from the road, which was large and acting extremely quiet. "Was that when you came into it?" Lavinia said. "No. My father lived another 9 years." He turned his head and the light caught the ruined line of his nose. "I went into the quarries at 20 because there was nothing else in that house to do," he said, "and at 22 a block came off the face wrong and put me on my back 5 weeks. I was told afterwards that my father asked whether the block had been saved." "I'm sorry," she said. "I did not tell you for sympathy." "I know. I said it because I meant it. There is a difference." "Yes," he said, "there is." On the afternoon of the third day, Mr. Bewley found her in the East Passage with the face of a man delivering news he hopes has already arrived. "His Grace goes tomorrow morning, my lady. The Kelverton party must be in London by Friday." "Of course," Lavinia said. "He asked me to say it to you directly," Mr. Bewley added, rather than simply going. She absorbed that. He had sent the steward. He had not been willing to leave without warning her, and rather than say so himself, which would have shown too much, he had arranged a proxy. It was both exactly like him and quietly devastating, and she was not yet sure she liked being able to tell the difference. "Thank him for the courtesy," she said. She found him in the yard next morning while the horses were being put to. "You are going," she said. "Yes. London, then north within the fortnight." "Will you be in town for the season?" "Parts of it. I attend selectively." "As do I." She lifted her chin very slightly. "Perhaps our selections will overlap." "Perhaps they will," he said. She put out her hand. He took it and bowed over it entirely correctly and held it half a second past the point at which convention released it. She felt that half second in her wrist and her elbow and in several places a glove is supposed to prevent. Then he got into the carriage and it went out through the gates, and she stood in the yard until it had turned onto the Barry Road and went in and did not think about him for the rest of the morning. She thought about him for the rest of the morning. They went up to London in the first week of March. 4 miles beyond this village, the road came to the pike at Cleehurst, and the carriage stopped while the man came out with his lantern in the grey light. "Morning, my lady," said Isaac Sowerby and lifted his hat. "Sorry. Business in November. Whole gate was sorry for you." I took the money and went back inside, and through the window she saw him write in the book that lay open on the ledge, dipping the pen and writing slowly with his tongue between his teeth. "What is it you write?" she called. He came back out, pleased to be asked. "Everything, my lady. Who comes through what hour, which way they are headed, how many horses. Trust wants it monthly." He tapped the doorpost. 31 years of it inside there. Folk forget I am writing. They go by and never think of it once. The carriage moved on, and Lavinia thought nothing of the conversation whatever. London in March 1806 was not the London of before the war. There were soldiers on the streets who were nobody's soldiers, any more discharged and half-pensioned, and standing at the corners of the good squares with their hands out. The funds were down. And the weather was wrong cold beyond anything reasonable for April, so that the fires were kept in through what should have been the mild weeks, and men in clubs said knowingly that it was the sunspots, and other men said it was the comet, and nobody knew anything. Society had meanwhile reached its verdict on Lavinia Draycott, which was that she had behaved impeccably. This meant that she was now fair game. Once going down Conduit Street, she passed the door of the dressmaker where the wedding gown had been fitted and remembered standing on that little dais in the middle of November with her arms out and the pins going in and having to be told to keep still. It was a strange small memory, and it went through her and out again. Lady Allerton was a widow of 70 with a brother at the Home Office, and no patience for anybody's nonsense, and her rooms in Hanover Square were the last in London where a woman might be invited on her own merits rather than her family's balance. Lavinia was talking to her hostess when the room changed. It did not announce itself. It was a shift in pressure, a small reorientation of everybody's attention, and she knew what it was before she turned. Kelverton was in the doorway in black, wearing it the way some men wear rank, which is not as decoration but as fact. I was not looking for her. He spoke to somebody and nodded at something, and then he looked up and across the whole crowded room. His eyes came to her directly, without any searching at all, as though they had simply known where she was since he came up the stairs. I inclined his head. She inclined hers. Neither of them crossed the room. She danced twice. Once with a pleasant young man who said nothing at all, and once with a cousin who had been sent by her mother to inspect her and was making a poor job of hiding it. Each time she turned in the figure, she was aware of exactly where in the room Kelverton was standing. He did not dance. He never danced. Everybody knew he never danced. Her third dance was a waltz with Crispin Vane, who had arrived at her elbow with the inevitability of bad weather. She said yes, because refusing the same man twice in one season required an explanation she had no appetite for. He danced adequately. He talked without stopping. His hand at her waist sat with more familiarity than the figure required. She glanced towards the east wall. Kelverton was looking at Vane's hand. His face had not changed in any way. Another person would have noticed. But it had gone entirely still, and she had learned by now that this was the only thing his face ever did when something reached him, and that it meant a great deal more than another man's shouting. The music ended. She turned and walked without hurry towards the east wall. Kelverton watched her come and did not pretend he had not been watching. "Mr. Vane dances adequately," he said. "He does. He also speaks continuously. I find the combination tiring. Then why accept? Because I am building a reputation for grace this season, and refusing every man who asks does not serve it. You could dance with fewer men, or with better ones." It came out with more certainty than she had planned, and she did not take it back. "Is that an invitation?" he said. "That depends on whether you dance." "I do not generally." "Generally," she repeated. His hand came up and settled at his side, not reaching for her positioned like a question. "The next waltz," he said. "If you are willing to be seen." "I am always willing to be seen." The question was whether you were. Something went through his face she had not seen there before. Not the almost movement at the corner of the mouth. Something stripped of management altogether, the look of a man discovering he was in considerably more difficulty than he had budgeted for. "Dance with me, Lavinia," he said. She put her hand in his. They danced once. Once was sufficient to leave Lady Allerton quietly delighted, her mother quietly appalled, and Crispin Vane quietly furious. Rooms notice when a man who does not dance, dances. He danced very well. He led the way, he did everything else, not pulling and not steering, simply making the space so clear that following became a thing she chose rather than a thing she submitted to. "You are staring," she said. "Yes. You might attempt subtlety." "I have found subtlety largely wasted in ballrooms," he said. "Everybody is watching everybody. The only people who notice a man looking at a woman are the people already looking at the woman themselves." The figure turned them. She could feel the room at the edge of her vision, the watching the small recalculations happening in real time across 3 counties. "This will be discussed," she said. "I know. Are you prepared for it?" "Are you asking whether I am prepared for people to learn that I find you interesting?" "I'm asking whether you have considered what it costs." "I have considered it since the night I walked into your dressing room and found you by yourself," he said. "I have considered it daily since. I am not a man who moves without considering." "And what," she said, "did your consideration conclude?" The last bars fell away. He stopped. They stood at the edge of the floor with his hand still at her waist. "That you are the most composed woman I have ever watched. Come apart," he said, "and that I intend to be wherever you are for as long as you permit it." Lavinia took a breath and stepped back, not away from him, only far enough to think. "Then you should know," she said, "that I will not be arranged again. Not by my family, not by anybody's politics, not by anybody. If you intend to be where I am, it will be because I permit it, and I permit nothing I do not trust." "Understood," he said without any pause at all. I do not trust quickly. I know. I watched you protect yourself gracefully for 3 days in November, and I have watched you do it from a distance ever since. I am not in a hurry." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she inclined her head, which was the smallest possible acknowledgement and the beginning of something. "Take me into supper," she said. 6 days later, she went unwillingly to a reception at Sedgewater House because her mother had said that not going would look like flinching, and her mother was right. She was crossing the second room when she heard her own name in the pitched voice of a man who wants to be overheard and wishes to be able to deny it. Crispin Vane was standing with 3 women and a glass. "It has all come round very prettily for Lady Lavinia," he was saying. "Though I confess I laughed when I heard it. You know Kelverton was offered her in October." "Offered," said one of the women. "Formally," said Vane. Draycott wrote to him through Fothergill at the club. "October, mark you." Weeks before the thing collapsed, the old man could see which way the wheat was going, and he went round the room looking for somebody to take her off the shelf before the shelf gave way. Kelverton declined. "One line," they say. Very civil and no reason given. And now here he is, waltzing. He turned then and saw her, and his face did something small and satisfied before it arranged itself into concern. "Lady Lavinia, I did not see you." "No," she said, "I imagine not." She got as far as the carriage before she began to shake, and she was glad of the dark. It was that in October, before she knew, while she was choosing flowers and writing to her aunt at Norwich about the breakfast, her father had been going round the clubs with her name in his mouth. Kelverton had read that letter. He had known she was on the market before she knew she was being returned. And then he had come to Renfield in November, and stood at the back of that chapel and watched her walk down the aisle by herself, with all of it already in his head. She went to Grafton Street at 11 the next morning without sending word. He came down at once. He looked at her face and did not ask what had happened. "Did my father write to you in October?" she said. He did not hesitate, and he did not pretend to consider it. "Yes." "Offering me?" "Yes." "And you refused him?" "Yes." She had held a great deal of herself very carefully together in the carriage, and something in the flatness of those 3 answers cut the string. "You let me sit in that east sitting room for 3 mornings, she said, "and pour you tea and tell you that everybody in the house was treating me like a cracked cup, and all the time you had a letter in your desk in which my father priced me." "I refused it because I do not buy people," he said. "You refused it because you did not care to take up what Sedgewater had put down, and then you walked into my dressing room and let me believe you had come for me." I went entirely still. "Why did you not tell me?" "Because you would have heard one thing only, which is that you were a lot in a sale. And you had been standing in front of 200 people not weeping for 11 hours, and I judged you had enough to carry that week." "You judged?" "Yes." Lavinia found that she was at last, and rather to her surprise, extremely angry. "You keep deciding what I am strong enough to be told," she said. "In November you decided I should not be warned. In March you decided I should not be informed. You are very proud of not managing me, and you have done nothing since the day I met you but manage me. That is not protection. That is editing." He said nothing. I had an answer for everything. She had never once seen him without one, and she stood in that hired drawing room and watched him not have one, and it gave her no satisfaction at all. "I'm going home," she said. He did not follow her out. She did not see him again for 4 weeks. Sir Gervase Thorne called at Bruton Street on the 9th of May with his solicitor and his hat in his hand. Lavinia had heard the name perhaps twice in her life. He sat for a pocket borough somewhere in the fens. He discounted bills for gentlemen who did not care to go to their bankers, and he had the settled, unremarkable look of a man who had never needed to raise his voice or lose his temper, because neither had ever been necessary. Han threatened nobody. He was throughout extremely civil. He simply laid things out. There was a deed, a mortgage upon Renfield, executed at the Hall on the 14th of November, 1815, securing the sum of £42,000. It had passed through 2 hands since, and he had lately taken it up entire. He was not here about the interest. He hoped very much that nobody would find it necessary to speak about the interest. I was here about a signature. He turned the deed round on the table so that it faced her, her father's hand at the foot of it, which she knew as well as she knew her own. and beneath it in the place, reserved for the concurrence of any person interested under the settlement of 1790, her own name, Lavinia Draycott. In her own writing or in something so like it that she had to put her finger on the page to be sure it was not. "I am glad to have it confirmed," Sir Gervais said comfortably. "There is often difficulty about a lady's concurrence, and it is a great convenience when it is already regular." And Lavinia understood, sitting perfectly still, with her hands in her lap, exactly what had been done to her. She was not being asked to sign anything. She could refuse to sign until she was 90. She had already signed. The world would say she had signed. There it was on the parchment with a witness to it. To get out from underneath it, she would have to stand up somewhere and say the signature was false. And a false signature on a deed was not a quarrel between gentlemen. It was forgery. Forgery was a capital felony, and the same punishment fell on the man who knowingly uttered the paper as on the man who wrote it. To free herself, she would have to hang somebody, and she did not yet know who. "The commissioners want their petition before the House sits," Sir Gervais said, rising and reaching for his hat. "There is no hurry today. I shall do myself the honor of calling again." He bowed to her mother. He bowed to her. He went. Lavinia turned her head and looked at her father, who had stood by the window through the whole of it without saying one word. I did not look back. They went back into Suffolk at the end of May, and the summer did not come. The news came out of the fens before they left. The people at Littleport had gone into the streets with fowling pieces and a punt gun mounted on a wagon demanding bread and the price of bread, and had gone on to Ely, and the militia had been sent for. The special assize sat at Ely, and 5 men were hanged there at the end of June, and the notice was read in every parish church within 30 miles, Renfield included, so that the laborers might understand what had been decided about them. Then it rained for 19 days without a whole dry one among them. The fires were kept in through June, which nobody could remember, and the hay went black in the swath, and the wheat that had come up thin in the cold went down flat in the wet, and lay there and began to sprout in the ear where it stood. In July, there was snow on the tops of the Pennines. Hannah Ruddock died on the 11th of June. She was 6. Her father held home farm, and his people had held it since her great-grandfather's time. It was a fever, and the doctor at Barry said what doctors said, which was that a great many children were weak that year, and Lavinia stood in the churchyard in the rain in a black dress made for an entirely different occasion, and understood that this was a thing which would not be put right afterwards by anybody, whatever else was. Sir Gervais Thorne's notices came in on the 20th of June, served upon 4 cottages at the north end of the village, all of them standing on land outside the settlement of 1790 and belonging to her father. Absolutely. He did not touch home farm, and he did not touch the commons. His agent gave the tenants until Michaelmas, which was generous and which fooled nobody, because a man who wanted his money would have taken home farm first. Lavinia read the notices twice and understood that Sir Gervais was demonstrating a thing rather than doing it. Kelverton came in the 2nd week of July without warning, and she found him in the yard in the rain with Mr. Quennell behind him, holding a folder against his chest to keep it dry. They had not spoken since April. She let him in because there is nothing else to be done with a duke standing in one's yard in a downpour. He did not mention Grafton Street, and he did not apologize, which she noticed and was obscurely grateful for, because an apology in the first 4 minutes would have been a way of putting the thing behind them before it had been looked at. "I know about the deed," he said. "How?" Quennell heard it from a clerk. "Sir Gervais has been buying Draycott paper for 18 months, and he has not been quiet about it." And I can take it off him," Kelverton said. "All of it. Every bill and note your father has out, and the mortgage with it inside a month. I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering to be a different creditor." "No," she said. "If you buy that paper," she said, "then, on the day you buy it, I stop owing Sir Gervais Thorne £42,000 and start owing you £42,000, and every person in 3 counties will know it, and my mother will know it, and I will know it. In November, I was disposed of by one man's arithmetic. In October, I was offered round the clubs by my own father. I have spent 7 months making it clear to everybody I know that I am not a thing which can be settled. I am not going to have it settled by you because you happen to be kind." "Then," he said, "since I am here and wet, I have brought you something you will find harder to refuse." And Quennell put the folder on the table. It was not money. It was a contract drawn properly in triplicate from the Kelverden Works to the Renfield estate. 30 tons of burnt lime for the sour ground on the west side carried by coasting vessel to Ipswich at his charge, and in the same bottom 400 bushels of dried peas and beans out of Westmoreland at the Kendal price, which was less than half the Barry price. "This is charity," she said in a coat. "It is a contract. You will pay for it, and I shall make a small loss on the carriage." He put on his hat. "Your laborers cannot eat lime. They can eat the peas." She thought about Hannah Ruddock in the ground since June. "Leave the papers," she said. By the middle of October, there was no longer any pretending. The harvest had failed everywhere south of the Trent. What had been cut was cut wet and had heated in the stack. The price at Barry, which stood at 52 shillings and sixpence in the autumn of 1815, came in at 78 shillings, the quarter in the second week of October, and climbed every market day after it. And 3,800 acres of common and waste in the parish of Renfield, which for 400 years had been worth having and never worth fighting over, were suddenly worth a great deal of money to anybody with the patience to fence them. The Viscount Bramhall's letter came on the 11th. He proposed to call on the 17th on a matter of some delicacy. Her father accepted for her without asking. He arrived at 2 in the afternoon in weather that had turned to rain again. Lavinia received him in the great hall, standing which was deliberate. Her mother was there, which was also deliberate. Sir Gervase Thorne was there, because he had by then acquired the habit of being at Renfield on days when things happened, and her father was there because it was his house. And outside, under the portico, and out into the rain, beyond it, something over 70 people from the village and the outlying farms stood in the wet waiting. They had come about the granary. Home Farm had brought in 430 quarters of sound wheat cut dry in a 5-day window at the end of August, which was the only piece of luck the estate had had in 14 months. It stood in the stone granary behind the stables. It was the property of the settlement and therefore hers, and it had been held back on her instruction to be sold at Barry in the spring when the price would be highest and the half-year's interest fell due at Lady Day. Every week she held it, it was worth more. Everybody in the county knew what was in that granary. There was no bread in the village, and had been none worth the name since August. And that morning a deputation had come up to the house to ask her, with their hats in their hands, whether anything might be done. She had asked them to wait. Julian Aylward had not changed. He kissed her mother's hand and said something about the roads, and came to the point with the ease of a man who had prepared it in the carriage. He wished to renew his addresses. His conduct in November had been indefensible. He had been young and badly advised and under great pressure from his father, and there had been considerations of a financial nature which he had not been at liberty to explain, and was now at liberty to remedy. His father was prepared to be extremely generous. The settlement he proposed would take up the whole of the Draycott paper, every bill and note, and the mortgage entire, and discharge it. The notices upon the 4 cottages would be withdrawn. The tenants would remain. And the matter of the commons, which he understood had been vexatious, would be regulated in a manner agreeable to both families. It was a genuinely good offer. That was the difficulty with it. Say yes, and the debt went, the notices went, the 4 families kept their roofs, and the 70 people standing in the rain outside her door would eat. Say no, and they would not. She let the silence run until it was uncomfortable, and then she spoke. "Julian," she said, "in March of last year, my father signed a supplemental article to our marriage settlement 3 days after the Corn Bill passed. It provided that the agreement should stand for, so long as wheat at Barry was maintained above 80 shillings the quarter, and that below that figure either family might withdraw upon notice without cause assigned." Julian's face did not move, which told her everything. In October the return came in at 52 and 6. Your father's solicitors gave notice on the 6th of November. Your man came as far as the King's Head on the 12th and turned round. You did not write because there was nothing to write. There had been no quarrel. The commodity had simply gone off. Lavinia, her mother, said, I am not distressed. I am being accurate. I know now to the shilling and the sixpence what I was priced at. 78 is a better figure than 52. It will be 90 before Christmas and 100 by the spring. And when it falls, and it will fall, because it always falls, you or your father or your solicitor will do exactly what you did before, and you will point to a clause and say, the arrangement had simply determined. She looked at him without any heat at all. The answer is no. And understand that it is not no because the figure is wrong. It is no because there is a figure. Julian Aylward found nothing to say. She turned to her father. And you, she said, if you ever again put my name to anything in any room, at any table, in any letter to any club, I shall leave this house that day and not come back to it. And you may explain my absence to the county, however you find convenient. Her father's face went the color of tallow. Sir Gervase Thorne shifted his weight very slightly and said nothing, and she thought, watching him, that he had understood something in the last 4 minutes that he had not understood when he came in. Then Lavinia walked past, all of them past her mother's outstretched hand, out through the doors, onto the portico, and into the noise of the rain. 70-odd faces turned up to look at her. She had nothing prepared and found she did not need it. Mr. Ruddock, she said, open the granary. There was a sound from the crowd that was not quite a cheer because they were too far gone for cheering. All of it, 430 quarters. Mr. Bewley will measure it out by household from the parish list, and Mrs. Yaxley will keep the account, and every one of you will come up and be entered and take your share, and nobody is to be told. They must ask twice. The mill will grind at the estate's charge. If there is a family in this parish not on the list, you will tell me, and I will put them on it. Somebody at the back said, God bless you, my lady, and somebody else told him to be quiet. Lavinia made herself finish it because they deserved the truth as much as the 200 in the chapel had. I want you to know what this is, she said. That wheat was to be sold in March to pay the interest on this estate. There is no other money. When March comes, we will not pay it, and what follows from that will follow. I would rather owe Sir Gervase Thorne than watch this parish go through another winter like the last one. That is the whole of my reasoning, and you may judge it as you please. She went back inside. Julian Aylward left within the hour. Sir Gervase Thorne stayed to dinner, which she had not expected, was perfectly civil throughout, and at the end of it thanked her mother for a pleasant evening, and observed to the table generally that the petition would want lodging before the house sat in the spring, and that these things went easier when a family was of one mind. Then he went home content. She began the next morning in the kitchen. She did not send for a solicitor, and she did not write to Grafton Street. She had been reduced by other people's papers since she was 23 years old, and she had decided in the night quite calmly to find out what was on them herself. Mrs. Yaxley, she said, what were we in the house on the 14th of November last year? The 14th, my lady. Mrs. Yaxley went to the shelf where 11 volumes stood in order and took down 1815 without hesitating and turned to the page as though she had been waiting 3 years to be asked something. Dinner for 2. Her ladyship and Mrs. Ferrand. That is all that went up. 2. To my lady. You were in town at the dressmaker's and did not come home until the afternoon of the 15th. And his lordship was away. Away where? That I could not say. But he was not fed here, and there is nothing here for his man either, and if his lordship had slept in this house that night, I should have had 2 more covers and a fire laid in the west room, and there is neither. She was at the Cleehurst gate before noon. Isaac Sowerby brought out the volume for 1815 and turned the pages back with a thick finger, and there it was in a slow, careful hand. 13th of November, 11 in the forenoon. The Earl of Draycott's chariot 4 horses westward. 15th of November, 8:30 in the forenoon, the same eastward returning. He never went by me on the 14th, my Lady Sowerby said. Nor could he have. There is no other road off that side of the estate that will take a chariot in November. He would have been to the axles in the lane. She had it copied and signed and dated in his own hand, with the trust stamp on it, and paid him for his trouble and made him take the money. That night in her own room, she put three things side by side on the desk. The deed which Sir Gervais's solicitor had left an office copy of in his civility. A letter she had written to her aunt at Norwich in the autumn of 1813, which her aunt had kept and returned to her as her aunt kept everything. And her own pocketbook for 1815, in which on the 14th of November, in her own careless hand, she had written to Conduit Street at 11, fitting kept standing an hour and a quarter, dined with the Farrens home tomorrow. The signature on the deed was not her signature. It was her signature copied. When she laid the letter beside it, she could see the copying in the way the pen had lifted where a real hand would have run on, in the small conscientiousness of a forger who has drawn a shape rather than written a name. And the letter to Norwich had been carried to the post by one person, because every letter that had ever left her hands in that house had been carried to the post by one person. She went down to the business room in the morning. Mr. Everard Poole had been her father's secretary for 19 years. He had taught her to mend a pen when she was 9. He had carried her letters since she was 12. He was 54 years old, and he had the finest hand of any man she had ever met. And when she put the deed and the letter down on the desk in front of him side by side and said nothing at all, he looked at them for perhaps 4 seconds and then put both his hands flat on the desk to stop them shaking. "I have been waiting a year," he said. "Sit down, Mr. Poole." He sat and told her all of it and never once tried to make himself better than he was. He had been at Bury on the night of the 14th of November because her father did not go to Bury alone. There was a house on Abbeygate Street with a hazard table in it, and her father had been at it since the evening of the 13th, and by 2 in the morning on the 15th, he had lost £9,000 and given his note of hand for it. The man who took up that note at the table quietly as a convenience was acting for Sir Gervais Thorne. The Earl signed nothing else. That was the truth of it. He had signed no deed and agreed to no mortgage. He had signed a note of hand at a table and gone home in the morning to give his daughter away. 3 weeks later, Sir Gervais sent for Poole. He held nearly £600 of Poole's own paper. He did not threaten. He never threatened. He observed that the sum was awkward, and that a man of 53 with no family and no place to go was in a difficult position, and that there was a small service of a clerical nature which might be done. "He wrote it out for me," Poole said. "The whole deed in his own drafting. I had only to put the 2 names at the foot. I did his lordship's first, because I have written his lordship's hand 1,000 times on receipts and orders, and God forgive me, it did not feel like very much. Yours took me 3 days. I did it 11 times before it would do." £42,000, she said. "What is my father's debt?" 11,200, my lady, and it has been 11,200 for 4 years. 9 of that is the note from the table. The rest is old." "Then why does the deed say 42? And Everard Poole looked up, and she saw that he had been carrying the answer for a year and waiting for somebody to ask the right question so that he could put it down. "Because it was never about the money, my lady," he said. 42,000 is a figure nobody can pay. It is written to be impossible. It is written so that when the commissioners sit and the family says it cannot consent to the enclosure, everybody in that room already knows the estate is drowning and consenting is the only way out of it. She waited. "I does not want your father's £11,000, Poole said. He wants 3,800 acres of common and waste, and to have them he must have a petition, and to have a petition he must have the consent of the owners of 4/5 of the value in the parish. Your family is 5/6 of it. It cannot be done without Renfield, and it cannot be stopped by anybody else if Renfield goes in." "And a mortgagee cannot consent," Lavinia said slowly. "No, my lady. A man who is owed money on land has no voice about the land. Only the owner has a voice. He could foreclose, but a foreclosure goes through the equity courts and takes years, and the borrower may redeem, and the house sits in the spring and does not wait for anybody. He could not buy the land in time, and he could not take it in time. So he took the signature. I took the signature, Poole said. The debt was never the object. The debt was the lever. Everything else in that deed is furniture. The only line Sir Gervase Thorne cares about is the one with your name at the end of it, because that is the line he will hold up in front of the meeting, and it says, "You have consented and are of full age, and no gentleman in that room will ever think to ask a lady whether she was in the house." "When do they sit?" she said. "The 20th of March, my lady, at the Angel at Bury. It is the meeting of the owners to sign the petition." She had 5 months. "Mr. Poole, I want it in writing, all of it, sworn." I went white to the lips, and she watched him understand precisely what she was asking, because he had understood it from the moment she put the 2 papers on his desk. "My lady," he said, "if that is ever read out, I shall hang." "I know," she said. Then he drew the paper towards him and took up his pen, which was the finest instrument he had, and began to write in the beautiful hand that had ruined him. He swore it before a magistrate at Stowmarket 4 days later because he would not use anybody nearer, and signed it with the same care he gave to everything. Lavinia folded it and put it in her pocket, where the supplemental article had been since November, and where the note from the east sitting room had been since the winter, and where they both still were. She went to her father that evening and laid the copy of the gate book on the table between them and the kitchen book beside it, and watched him look at the 2 of them and stop being able to breathe properly. "You did not sign that deed," she said. "No." "When did you learn it existed?" He put his hand over his eyes. "January. He came to me in January and showed it to me and said he supposed it must be regular since there it was." "January," she said. 10 months. I could not. Lavinia, think what you are asking. To say the deed is false, I must say where I was on the night of the 14th of November, and what I was doing, and what I lost and to whom. I must stand up somewhere and be that man in front of people. And it is not only me, it is your mother. It is you. It is every door in the county. She looked at her father, who had been warm once and clever once, and who had somewhere along the way chosen the wrong things with the wrong people, and then spent 20 years compounding the error rather than admit the first one. "Yes," she said, "that is exactly what I am asking." The winter of 1817 was the hungriest anybody could remember, and the country turned mean with it. On the 28th of January, the Prince Regent went down to open Parliament and came back with the windows of his carriage broken, and whether it was a stone or a pellet or nothing at all was never settled, but the government did not require it to be settled. On the 4th of March, an act was passed suspending the habeas corpus, and after that day, any person suspected of treasonable practices could be taken up on a warrant from a Secretary of State and held without charge, without bail, and without any term set to it. Kelverton had written for 2 years to the head man of the slate gangs above Kelverton Fell about the price of bread and the wages that would meet it. Before the 4th of March, those letters were the ordinary business of a landlord who employed 400 men. After the 4th of March, they were something else. Mr. Quennell came to Bruton Street on the 11th with his hat still in his hand. "I was taken yesterday morning," he said, "at Grafton Street at 7. He is in Coldbath Fields." "On what charge?" "There is no charge, my lady. There need not be one." His Grace's counsel was told quite courteously that the warrant is regular, that peerage is no protection where treasonable practice is alleged, and that the writ which would ordinarily fetch him out has been suspended by Act of Parliament. There is nothing to move against, and therefore nothing to move. How long can they hold him? Until they let him go, my lady. Who swore the information? Quennell looked at the carpet. Sir Gervase Thorne, he said, as a member of the House, sworn on the 6th of March, 2 days after the act. Why him, she said. There are 300 men in England with letters like that in a drawer. Why did Sir Gervase Thorne trouble himself about a Westmoreland quarry owner at all? And Quennell, who was an honest man in an impossible position, told her the rest. Since September, the Duke had been buying up Draycott paper, quietly through 3 agents in 3 towns, small parcels at a time, never in his own name. He had close to £7,000 of it with orders that no demand was ever to be made upon any of it. The object he had told Quennell was simply that it should not be in anybody else's hands. He had promised her in July that he would not do it. In September, he had begun. And it was the buying that exposed him. A man like Sir Gervais kept his ear on the discount market the way a farmer keeps his eye on the sky, and when Draycott paper began moving in 3 towns at once, and none of it came back to be presented, he wanted to know who stood behind Renfield. He found out and waited 5 months for a means of removing him, and Parliament obligingly provided one. "I did it to protect you," my Lady Quennell said miserably. "I know what he did it for," Lavinia said. She was allowed a quarter of an hour with him on the 13th. Coldbath Fields was clean, in the way a thing scrubbed with lye is clean and cold in a manner that got into the back of the neck and stayed. He came in with his coat over his arm and 4 days of beard on him, and when he saw her he stopped moving entirely in the way she had learned to read. "You should not have come here," he said. "Everybody keeps telling me where I should not be." "I bought the paper," she said. "Yes. You told me in July that you would not." "Yes. Why?" "Because I could not sit in Westmoreland doing nothing," he said, "and because I told myself that buying it and never using it was not the same as buying it." He looked at his hands, the short square nails, the old lime scars across the knuckles. "That was a lie, and I knew it when I told it. I did not do it for you. I did it so that I should not have to feel what I was feeling. You told me exactly what that was in April, and I heard you and I did it anyway." "The meeting is on this 20th, she said. "I have to do it alone now. Not because I have chosen it. Because you are in here." "Yes," he said. "You could always have done it alone. I am the one who has needed 1.5 years to believe it." The turnkey said the time was up. At the door she turned round. "Ambrose," she said, and it was the first time she had used it, "I am not coming back here. Not because I do not want to. Because if I spend the 20th of March thinking about a man in a cell, I shall lose, and I do not intend to lose." "Then do not come back," he said. The meeting of the proprietors of the parish of Renfield was held in the long room at the Angel at Bury St. Edmunds on the 20th of March, 1817, at 11 in the forenoon. Mr. Skelmer, who acted for Sir Gervais, took the head of the table. There were 11 small proprietors down the sides of it, farmers, mostly in their good coats, uneasy. Julian Aylward sat near the door with his hat on his knee. And at the far end in the corner, with his hands folded on the head of his stick, sat the 6th Earl of Draycott, who had not spoken to his daughter in 11 days, and had come because she had written him one line asking him to. Lavinia sat in the middle of the room with a plain canvas bag on her lap. Mr. Skelmer opened. He was brisk and courteous, and had done this before. The petition for the enclosure of the commons and waste of the parish, 3,811 acres, by the survey was to be lodged before the house rose for Easter. The consent of the proprietors of 4/5 in value was required. The Draycott interest stood at 5/6 of the assessed value and was therefore determinative. "And the Draycott interest," said Mr. Skelmer, "is before you." He laid the deed on the table and turned it so the room could see and read the recital aloud. "That the Earl of Draycott and the Lady Lavinia Draycott, being of full age and beneficially entitled under the settlement of 1790, had joined and concurred, and had charged the said lands, and had released unto the mortgagee such rights as might be necessary for the better improvement of the same. Executed at Renfield Hall on the 14th day of November, 1815. Lavinia stood up. "Mr. Skelmer," she said, "before the paper goes round, I should like to put 4 things beside it." She took them out of the bag one at a time and set them on the table in a row, and she did not hurry, because she had learned in a chapel in November that the pace at which a woman does a thing is half of what a room takes from it. The first, she said, is the toll book of the Cleahurst Gate, being the property of the Bury and Renfield Turnpike Trust, kept by Isaac Sowerby, who has kept it 32 years. It records that my father's chariot passed westward at 11 in the forenoon on the 13th of November, 1815, and that it did not pass eastward again until 8:30 in the morning of the 15th. There is no other road that will take a carriage off that side of the parish. The second is the kitchen book of Renfield Hall, kept by Martha Yaxley, who has kept it since 1793. On the 14th of November, 1815, dinner was sent up for 2, her ladyship and Mrs. Ferrand. There is no cover for my father, no cover for his servant, and no fire laid in his rooms. The third is my own pocketbook for 1815. On the 14th of November, I was in Conduit Street in London at my dressmaker's being fitted for the gown I was married in 9 days ago and was not married in then. Mrs. Ferrand's sister dined with me. I did not reach Renfield until the afternoon of the 15th. She put down the 4th. And this is a letter I wrote to my aunt at Norwich in the autumn of 1813, which she kept as she keeps everything. That is my signature. Compare it, gentlemen, with the signature at the foot of Mr. Skelmer's deed. Compare the two of them and tell me which of them was written and which of them was drawn. Nobody in the room moved. That deed says it was executed at Renfield Hall on the 14th of November, she said. My father was not at Renfield Hall. I was not at Renfield Hall. Neither of us signed it. Somebody signed it for us. She let that sit for a moment. That is forgery, she said. Not a mistake and not an irregularity. Forgery of a deed is a capital felony, and every one of you knows it, and every one of you knows that the man who utters a forged instrument, knowing it to be forged, stands in the same place at the assize as the man who wrote it. Sir Gervase Thorne uttered it in this room 4 minutes ago. The room had gone entirely silent except for the fire. Sir Gervase Thorne, who had said nothing at all so far, spoke for the first time, and his voice was as pleasant as it had been at her mother's dinner table. Lady Lavinia, he said, no gentleman here doubts your word about a dressmaker. But a deed comes to a man as it comes. I bought that paper in good faith from a party in London. If it is bad, I am the person most injured by it, and the first to be sorry. You may prove all day where you were. You cannot prove what I knew. She had expected exactly that and had expected it since the 9th of May. She put her hand into the bag and brought out the last thing in it, folded and sealed, and laid it face down on the table and kept her hand flat on top of it. This is a deposition, she said, sworn before a magistrate at Stowmarket in November by the man who wrote both signatures. He names the room, he names the day, he names the man who drafted the recital in his own hand and gave it to him to copy, and he states that he was moved to it by the holder of £600 of his own paper. Sir Gervase Thorne did not move at all, which she noted because she had learned what a man's stillness meant. I am not going to read it, she said. If I read this out, 2 men hang. One of them has been known to me since I was 9 years old. He taught me to mend a pen. He has carried every letter I ever wrote to anybody, and he has been sick with this for a year, and he came to me in the end without being asked twice. I'm not going to buy this parish at the price of the rope. She turned the paper over once and put it back into the bag still sealed. But I have it, and it is sworn, and it will keep. It will keep for 20 years. And Sir Gervase Thorne will spend every one of those years knowing that it is in a drawer somewhere in Suffolk and that I have not decided. So here is what I want, she said, and it is 3 things, and they are not negotiable, and I shall not ask twice. That deed is destroyed in this room in front of these gentlemen before anybody leaves it. The petition for the enclosure of the Commons of Renfield is withdrawn today and is not lodged again in my lifetime, and I shall be a long time dying. And Sir Gervase Thorne sits down at that table and writes and swears now before the innkeeper and 2 of these gentlemen as witnesses that the information he laid on the 6th of March against Ambrose Hesketh, Duke of Kelverton, was laid without foundation, and that he withdraws it absolutely. Sir Gervase said that last is a serious thing to ask a man to put his name to. Yes, Lavinia said. It is. It will lie on the file at the Home Office with your name at the bottom of it for the rest of your life. And if the first information was true, the second is perjury. And if the second is true, the first was. I'm aware of exactly what I'm asking you for. I'm asking you to choose which paper you would rather have in the world. She looked round the long table at the 11 farmers who had come in that morning intending to sign whatever was put in front of them, and who were now looking at Sir Gervase Thorne the way men look at a dog that has been in the fowl house. Not one of them spoke for him. Sir Gervase Thorne considered the room for perhaps 10 seconds. He drew the inkstand towards him. The deed was burnt in the grate of the long room at the Angel at 20 minutes before 1 o'clock and 11, Proprietors of the parish of Renfield stood round the fire and watched it go, because she had asked for that precisely so that 11 men could say afterwards they had seen it. Lady Allerton carried the withdrawal to Whitehall herself by way of her brother on the 21st. I was released on the afternoon of the 26th of March, and Quennell had a carriage at the gate, and he did not go north. Her father resigned his commission of the peace in April and was quietly taken off the list at his club, and for 5 weeks the county discussed almost nothing else. He gave up Bruton Street and moved into the Dower House at the end of the Renfield beaches, and Lavinia went to see him there on a bright, cold morning. "I do not know how to ask you to forgive me," he said. "You are not to ask me yet. I love you. I am not going to pretend this did not happen, and I am not going to have it smoothed over at Christmas, and you will never again put my name to anything as long as you live. Beyond that, we shall see. It will take some years, and I would rather tell you the truth than be kind now and cold afterwards." He wept a little, which she had known he would. Everard Poole sailed for Halifax out of Ipswich in the last week of April with £30 of her money in his coat and a character in her hand saying that he had served her family 19 years, wrote a beautiful hand, and could be trusted with correspondence. Whether the last was true, she was never certain, and she wrote it anyway. His deposition was never read out. It stayed folded and sealed at the bottom of her writing case for the rest of her life. And there were nights in the first year when she got up and looked at it, and could not decide whether she had been merciful or merely comfortable, and she never did settle it. The 70 families kept the commons. The 4 cottages at the north end of the village stood. Hannah Ruddock stayed where she was under the yew on the north side of the church, and none of it ever touched that at all. Crispin Vane said something pointed at his club in May, and was not attended to. Kelverton came to Renfield on the last day of March. They walked out to the top of the beech avenue where the ground was still hard. "I have 2 things to say," he said, "and I have arranged them badly, so take them as they come. The first is that I am not sorry I was arrested, and I am extremely sorry I lied to you in July. Those are separate, and I will not have them confused. You told me plainly what you would not have. I said I understood. Then I did it anyway and dressed it up as care. That is the whole of the offense, and I shall not make it smaller by talking about my motives." She said nothing because he was not finished, and she had learned to let him finish. "The second is that I have loved you since the night you turned round in that room and looked at me as though I were an inconvenience. But for 16 months, I loved you as something to be got in front of. I sat in that place a fortnight with no way to reach anybody. And then Quennell came in and told me in the wrong order and far too fast what you had done at the Angel with a canvas bag and a kitchen book, and I sat down on the bed and understood that I had never once looked straight at you. 'I do not want to arrange anything for you,' he said. 'I have not the smallest talent for it, and every attempt has cost you something.' Lavinia looked at the ruined line of his nose and the scarred hands, and the entire absence of management in his face. 'I do not need a man who arranges the world around me. I have discovered I can do that myself, and I would rather. I need one who will stand in the room and let me speak.' 'Then ask me for something,' he said. 'No,' she said. 'You ask. Marry me,' he said. 'Not a settlement, not a proposal of business, not 4 minutes of reasoning. Marry me,' he said again more quietly. 'Not because of your father, and not because of the estate, which will do very well now without either of us, and not because London will think it neat. Because I would like to spend the rest of my life in rooms that you are in. And because when I walked through a door by mistake and found a woman holding her own dress together, the night before she was to be sold, something in me said, there she is, and I have never been able to unsay it.' 'Obviously, yes,' she said. He let out a breath, which was the only time she ever saw him visibly put down something he had been carrying. They were married in the chapel at Renfield on the 9th of May, 1817, in front of very nearly the same 200 people, a good many of whom had sat in those same pews in the snow 18 months before, and had privately hoped ever since that it would come round. She dressed in the same room. There was no jewel from him and no parcel, because she had told him that if he sent her anything, she would send it back. There was one line brought up with the water at 7. 'I am in the chapel. I have been here since 6. The gown was ivory, and she had chosen it herself from a woman in Barry who had listened to exactly what she wanted and made exactly that. It had no lace at the throat and no train to speak of, and it had, at her particular instruction, no pocket in it anywhere. She had nothing left to carry. Every hook down the back of it was closed by 9:30. She had closed them herself, standing at the glass with her arms bent behind her at that undignified angle, and it had taken her 9 minutes, and she had not called anybody. Her mother stood behind her with her hands folded and her chin up, and did not adjust her cuffs once. "You look extraordinary," Lady Draycott said. "I feel extraordinary," Lavinia said, and it was simply true with no asterisk on it anywhere. That evening, when the last carriage had gone down the avenue and the house had settled into its own quiet, Lavinia stood once more in the dressing chamber in the same candlelight in front of the same glass and reached behind her for the hooks. The door opened. She did not turn round. "I can manage," she said. "I know," said her husband. "You always could." He crossed the room anyway. His hands found the first hook with the same certainty as the first night, unhurried, exact one, and then the next, and then the next, and this time in the other direction. The silk loosened. The candle held the two of them in the glass, and she watched his face behind hers, and he was watching her, and there was nothing in it that was being managed at all. "We began here," she said. "Yes, a wrong turning. The best one I ever took," he said. "If you have stayed to the last word through the chapel and the rain and the room at the Angel and this final candle, then you already know that this was never a story about a wedding. It was about a woman who discovered that every document which had ever decided her life was signed in a room she was not in. An article about the price of wheat, a letter offering her round the clubs, a deed with her own name at the foot of it in somebody else's careful hand. Nobody ever asked her. They assumed her signature, and in the end, one of them simply wrote it. And here is what she understood later than she would have liked, and still in time. The power in that room at the Angel was never money, and it was never rank. Sir Gervase Thorne did not lose to somebody richer. He lost to 4 ordinary books he had never once considered: a cook's account of who was fed, a gatekeeper's note of who went by and at what hour, a letter an aunt had kept, and a young woman's pocketbook in which she had written without thinking about it that she had been kept standing an hour and a quarter at her dressmaker's. Powerful men record. What they believe is important. They do not count the covers at dinner. They do not read the gatebook. It does not occur to them that a woman writes down her own days. The invisibility the world lays over women and servants and men who keep gates is exactly where the evidence sits in plain sight waiting. The lesson is not that if you keep your dignity, somebody worthy will come and find you. It is harder than that. Nobody is coming. The man who loved her most tried twice to save her, and both times made it worse, and the second time so much worse that he was locked up, and she walked into that room alone. Freedom has a price, and nobody else can pay it for you. She paid with her father's name, with 430 quarters of wheat that would have saved the estate, and with a sworn paper she chose not to open and carried the rest of her life without ever being certain she had been merciful. She did not win cleanly. Hannah Ruddock is still under the U. But she walked out of that room the only person alive with the right to write her own name. And if you keep one picture from all of this, keep the second wedding morning. The same room, the same glass, and every hook down the back of that gown already closed, because she had closed them herself, and it had taken her 9 minutes. The man still came. She still wanted him to come. He was simply no longer required for the dress to shut. That is the difference between being chosen and being rescued. If this story moved something in you, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Leave a comment and tell us which moment stayed with you. Was it the chapel in November, the granary in the rain, the 4 books on the table at the Angel, or that last candle? Share it with somebody who needs to hear it today. Your support is what makes these stories possible.